4:51 a.m. Manitou Springs, Colorado. A line of federal vehicles sat dark on a service road off Ruxton Avenue. Engines off, lights off. 16 agents in tactical gear held a stack formation at the east wall of a shuttered auto repair garage. The building had no signage. The bay doors were padlocked from outside. A hand-painted address plaque read something that no longer corresponded to any active business registration in El Paso County. The team leader gave one signal. The saw unit moved to the drywall panel at the back of the front service bay. Not the garage door. Not the office entrance. A wall. A wall that the blueprints on file with Manitou Springs code enforcement did not show as a wall. What was behind it had been there for 106 days. The saw bit into the drywall at 4:52 a.m. on the morning of July 11, 2026. And a case that began with a single line item on a municipal water bill was about to reach its end. Rewind 8 months. In the fall of 2025, the Pikes Peak region of Colorado had become a distribution corridor for pressed fentanyl pills. Not the largest in the country, not even the largest in the state, but notable for a specific reason. The product moved at a volume and consistency that suggested professional logistics, not improvised street dealing. The Colorado Multi-Agency Task Force, operating under DEA oversight out of the Colorado Springs field office, had been building a case since October of 2025. The operation had a name, a budget, and a theory. The theory was straightforward. A 6-person distribution cell was moving pressed fentanyl pills, the kind pressed to look like pharmaceutical oxycodone, through 3 counties along the Front Range: El Paso County, Fremont County, Pueblo County. By January of 2026, task force agents had documented transactions at 11 locations. They had cell phone intercepts. They had a confidential informant who had been present at 2 separate handoff events. They had surveillance footage from a parking structure in Colorado Springs showing 2 of the 6 defendants handling a package that later field-tested positive for fentanyl. The case, as of January, was solid. It was also, as far as the lead case agent knew, a drug case. Special Agent Dana Reyes had been with DEA's Denver field office for 9 years. She had transferred to the Colorado Springs satellite office in August of 2025, specifically to work the Pikes Peak distribution corridor. She was methodical. She was, by her supervisor's description in an internal evaluation, a person who read the footnotes. That habit would prove to be the difference. In February of 2026, with the indictment paperwork for the 6 defendants in draft form, the task force financial analyst, an HSI-assigned forensic accountant named Marcus Kellner, prepared an asset summary for the prosecution team. Standard procedure. Document what the defendants owned, leased, or paid for. Map every financial thread back to the drug proceeds. 5 of the 6 defendants had the expected financial profile. Cash-intensive. Sparse paper trail. Properties held through LLCs registered in other names. The 6th defendant was different. His name in this reconstruction is Elias Varco. He was 43 years old, a resident of Fountain, Colorado, and one of the mid-tier distributors in the network. His financial profile was mostly consistent with the others. But Kellner flagged one item: a municipal utility payment, industrial water service. Billed to a shell company, registered at a Colorado Springs address that itself traced back, through 2 intermediary registrations, to Varco's brother-in-law. The property serviced by the water account, a commercial building on a side street off Ruxton Avenue in Manitou Springs. Zoning classification: light industrial. Previous use: auto body repair. Current status: vacant, per El Paso County commercial property records. The bill had been paid on time, every month, for the previous 4 months. Water service at the industrial rate. For a building that, officially, had no occupants. Kellner flagged it as a potential stash site. Put a note in the asset memo. Moved on. Reyes read the footnote. What Reyes noticed wasn't just that the building was vacant. It was the billing tier. Industrial water service is priced differently than residential or standard commercial service. The rate structure Varco's shell company had been paying, on time, automatically, through a recurring bank draft, corresponded to a consumption level that Reyes, who had grown up in a family that ran a small fabrication shop, recognized as higher than dormant. Not dramatically higher, but higher. An empty building uses essentially no water. Pipes don't run. Fixtures don't flow. A truly vacant property typically gets its utilities suspended or runs essentially zero consumption. This building was using water. Consistently. Quietly. At a rate consistent with regular, ongoing use. She pulled the utility records through a subpoena to the Colorado Springs Utilities Authority. The consumption data went back to mid-March of 2026. Steady. Every billing cycle. She wrote a single line in her case notes. Physical surveillance required. Manitou Springs property. That note triggered 3 weeks of the most careful fieldwork in the investigation. Here's what's most surprising about this case. The drug operation, the one that had consumed 9 months of task force resources, was essentially already wrapped by this point. The 6 defendants were indicted. The evidence was documented. The case was going to trial. The Manitou Springs property was, by every measure, a secondary thread. An asset footnote. Reyes pursued it anyway. The first challenge was surveillance. Manitou Springs is a small community. The streets near the Ruxton Avenue corridor are narrow, residential in parts, and populated enough that federal vehicles sitting static would be noticed within hours. The task force didn't have the resources to run a full fixed surveillance post on a building that might turn out to be nothing. What they did instead was a mobile pass-by rotation. 3 vehicles, staggered timing, different cover, a contractor's truck, a personal vehicle, a utility van from a cooperating Colorado Springs agency. They documented the building exterior over 11 days in late February and early March of 2026. No observed foot traffic. No vehicles parked on the lot. Bay doors padlocked. Windows blacked out from inside. But on the 7th day of the rotation, one of the surveillance team members noted something. A small section of the roofline on the east side of the building showed a heat signature differential during early morning passes. She was doing a drive-by with a standard-issue thermal imaging unit, the kind used to document suspected stash sites before warrant applications. The front of the building read cold. The back section, behind the main service bay, read warmer. Not dramatically. Not a bonfire. But the differential was consistent with an occupied, enclosed space. A space where human bodies were generating heat. The task force brought that finding to Reyes on a Thursday afternoon. The drug indictment was still the primary case. The financial analyst had flagged a water bill. The surveillance team had noted a thermal differential at a vacant building. None of it proved anything. Reyes called the U.S. Attorney's Office that afternoon and requested a warrant application conference for the following morning. What had been a narcotics case was about to become something else entirely. The warrant application was filed March 14, 2026. The supporting affidavit ran 41 pages. Most of it documented the drug case. 11 pages at the end documented the Manitou Springs property, the shell company trace, the utility billing anomaly, the thermal readings, the blacked-out windows, and the building's history. The magistrate granted the warrant the same day, and then the task force hit their first real obstacle. The entry plan called for a daylight approach, Lower risk, better visibility, coordinated with local law enforcement. The day the warrant was granted, a late-season Colorado snowstorm moved in from the northwest. Not unusual for mid-March at elevation, but severe enough to close the approach road to the Manitou Springs property and ground the aerial support element that had been scheduled for overwatch. The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days during which Reyes and her team could do nothing except monitor utility consumption remotely and run internal assessments of what they might find. What they found in the warrant application records was this: the building had been purchased in November of 2025 through the same shell company chain that paid the water bill for $212,000 in cash. The transaction had been documented. The deed was filed. El Paso County had the record. But the property had never been inspected by county commercial code enforcement after the sale because it had never applied for any permits or changes of use. It had simply been bought, quietly, with cash, through a chain of paper entities, and then left, officially, empty. The task force used the 4 storm days to do something else. They pulled missing persons reports. It was Kellner, the financial analyst, who made the suggestion. Not because he had any evidence, because the thermal readings were bothering him, and he had been reading about forced labor cases in his off time. His exact words per case notes were, "If the building is warm and nobody's supposed to be in it, it's either product or people. We already know what the product looks like for this crew. This doesn't look like product storage." The missing persons pool covered a geographic radius. Colorado Front Range communities and eastern Utah reported missing between December 1, 2025 and March 1, 2026. Young women, adults, ages 20 to 30. The initial return 37 open cases. Reyes narrowed the parameters. Women reported missing from specific communities within the radius. Women whose disappearances had not been connected to any domestic or voluntary absence indicator. Women for whom family members had filed active, ongoing reports with law enforcement. 16 names remained. One was a registered nurse named Paige Arndt, 24 years old, from Pueblo, Colorado. She had been reported missing by her mother on December 19, 2025, after she failed to appear for a scheduled holiday visit. Her car had been found at a park-and-ride lot off Interstate 25 with her personal effects inside. One was a paralegal named Simone Ray, 27 years old, from Grand Junction. Reported missing January 8, 2026, by her employer and her roommate simultaneously, when she did not appear for work and did not respond to messages for 48 hours. No vehicle recovered. One was a woman named Kristen Hale, 23 years old, from Canyon City. She had been 3 weeks from her wedding when she disappeared on February 2, 2026. Her parents had been driving Interstate 50 every weekend since, her photograph taped to the dashboard, stopping at truck stops and motels to show it to anyone who would look. 16 names. 16 sets of family members. 16 open cases across multiple jurisdictions, none of which had been formally connected to one another. Reyes had the list on her desk on the morning of March 18th, when the storm broke and the approach road to Ruxton Avenue reopened. She read through each name and its associated family contact. Then she closed the folder and began coordinating the entry team. What strikes us about this moment in the case file is the discipline it required. Reyes had a thermal reading and a water bill. She had 16 missing persons reports that matched a geographic and demographic pattern. She had no direct evidence connecting any of those 16 names to the building on Ruxton Avenue. Moving too early, with an entry that produced nothing, or worse, that alerted the network to the investigation, could have made everything worse. The patience that the situation required was the hardest part of the operation. Reyes knew that. She built a plan anyway. The plan that emerged over the following 3.5 months was deliberate and layered. The primary drug indictment moved forward on its own track. In late March, prosecutors unsealed the charges against the 6 defendants. The arrests were made over a 48-hour period. 300,000 fentanyl pills were seized in a coordinated sweep across Colorado Springs, Pueblo, and Cañon City. The story ran in the Colorado Springs Gazette on July 10, 2026, as a drug enforcement story. 6 defendants. Trafficking charges. Multi-county operation. That was the public record. What the Gazette story did not mention, what no public statement mentioned, was that the Manitou Springs property had been held off the primary warrant sweep. Deliberately. At Reyes's request, approved by the U.S. Attorney's Office and DEA headquarters. The reason, surveillance conducted through March, April, and into May had confirmed ongoing thermal readings at the Ruxton Avenue building. Whatever was inside was still there. And if the building was on the primary warrant, the network would know the moment the 6 defendants were arrested that a search was coming. Whatever was inside might not still be there by the time agents arrived, so the building stayed off the primary sweep. The 6 defendants were arrested. The drug case was public. The Manitou Springs property sat untouched, water bills still being paid by an automated bank draft from an account the defendants' associates had not yet thought to close, because none of them knew it was flagged. There is a line in the case file, a single sentence in the tactical assessment submitted to DEA headquarters in late May, that reads, "It is the assessment of the case team that the subjects using the Ruxton Avenue property are either unaware of its financial traceability or have calculated that its operational value outweighs the discovery risk." In other words, whoever was maintaining that building believed they were invisible. They were wrong. Through April and into June, the task force assembled the secondary entry team. This was no longer purely a DEA operation. FBI victim recovery specialists were brought in under a joint operational agreement. Homeland Security Investigations contributed personnel with experience in forced detention rescue scenarios. El Paso County Sheriff's Office provided K-9 units and perimeter control. A mobile command post was pre-positioned in late June at a site 2 miles from the Ruxton Avenue property. Medical resources, ambulance units, triage personnel from a federal contract medical team were staged in coordination with a local hospital system that was briefed on a general standby basis without being given specific operational details. One problem that nearly delayed the entire operation came in late June. An HSI agent conducting a pass-by surveillance run was involved in a minor traffic incident on Ruxton Avenue. His cover vehicle, registered to a fictional plumbing company, was clipped by a pickup truck at a corner. No injuries. But the incident required him to interact with a local resident who filed an incident report with Colorado Springs Police. The agent's cover held. But the incident created a documented presence on a street adjacent to the target property, and the task force spent 6 days assessing whether operational security had been compromised. It had not. But the 6 days were tense. Put yourself in Reyes's position for a moment. You have 16 names, you have a building you believe contains those people or some portion of them, you have months of preparation, and you are now sitting on a potential compromise with no way to confirm it. 6 days of waiting while operational security analysts reviewed the incident traffic report and the responding officer's notes. The conclusion, reached on July 2, 2026. No compromise. The local resident had not connected the incident to any federal activity. The cover held. On July 6th, the entry plan was finalized. On July 9th, the medical staging was confirmed. On July 10th, the Gazette story ran about the primary drug indictment. On July 11th at 4:51 a.m., the secondary element staged on the service road off Ruxton Avenue. The entry team numbered 22 personnel, 2 stacks of 8 agents each, plus a 4-person technical support element and 2-person medical triage forward. At 4:52 a.m., a remote-operated ground robot was sent into the front service bay through a side door that the technical element had previously documented as accessible with a standard breach tool. The robot swept the front bay for occupants and conducted a visual structural assessment. The bay was clear. Tools still hung on the walls from whatever auto body operation had previously occupied the building. A lift sat rusted and unmaintained. Oil stains on the concrete floor. And at the back of the front bay, a drywall partition. The building's original blueprints, the ones on file with Manitou Springs code enforcement, showed an open service bay running the full depth of the building. The drywall partition was not on those blueprints. It had been constructed after the November purchase. It divided the building roughly at the midpoint, a false rear wall, taped and painted to look finished, with no visible door or seam from the front bay. The robot's camera documented the wall, transmitted the image to the command post. At 4:54 a.m., the SAW unit moved in. Reyes, monitoring from the mobile command post, heard the SAW engage. She watched the forward camera feed on a laptop screen. The SAW cut a rectangular opening, approximately 4 feet by 6 feet, in the drywall partition. The team leader at the entry point was first through. What he saw on the other side of the wall was a partition space, approximately 30 feet by 40 feet, that had been constructed inside the rear half of the building's service bay. Temporary walls. Minimal lighting. A water line run from the building's main supply, which explained the utility consumption. 2 portable heating units, both active, which explained the thermal differential. And 16 young women, ages 22 to 28, sitting or lying on cots arranged in rows. The team leader's voice on the tactical radio, per the operational transcript, 16 confirmed, all ambulatory or responsive. Medical forward now. At 4:58 a.m., the first ambulance was waved in from the staging position, 2 blocks away. 16 women were walked out through the front service bay of the building on Ruxton Avenue, each wrapped in a thermal blanket from the medical triage team, each escorted by a federal agent. They were moved to ambulances staged behind the mobile command post, shielded from the street by the command vehicle's profile. The operation from SAW to last ambulance departure, 21 minutes. Among the 16, a young woman whose family, when notified by a victim specialist at 5:41 a.m. on July 11th, confirmed she was Paige Arndt, the nurse from Pueblo, reported missing 204 days earlier. Among the 16, a woman whose description matched and who was later confirmed to be the paralegal from Grand Junction. Among the 16, a woman from Cañon City, whose parents, reached by phone at 5:57 a.m., were on the road within minutes, the photographs still taped to their dashboard. Each of the 16 was transported to a regional medical facility. Each received immediate clinical evaluation. Each was admitted for observation, consistent with prolonged confinement. Hospital records, sealed under federal protective order, documented the duration and conditions of that confinement in clinical language that does not require elaboration here. The rescue at Ruxton Avenue was the largest single property recovery of adult captives in Colorado this decade. Here's the take that will probably get pushback. The Manitou Springs property existed because the system that was supposed to catch it, multiple missing persons investigations across multiple jurisdictions, never connected 16 names into a pattern. Each case was handled in its own silo. Pueblo looked for Paige Arndt. Grand Junction looked for Simone Ray. Cañon City looked for Kristen Hale. No single agency was looking for all 3 at once, and no algorithm had yet flagged the convergence. A forensic accountant noticed a water bill. That is what broke the case, not a coordinated multi-agency missing persons sweep, because that sweep never happened. Within 72 hours of the Ruxton Avenue rescue, federal prosecutors in the District of Colorado unsealed a superseding indictment. The original indictment had charged the 6 defendants with drug trafficking, conspiracy, and related counts arising from the 300,000-pill fentanyl seizure. The superseding indictment added federal kidnapping charges, forced detention charges, and conspiracy counts specific to the Ruxton Avenue operation. The kidnapping charges alone carried maximum sentences of life imprisonment. Of the 6 original defendants, 4 were already in custody on the drug charges and were transferred to federal detention on the expanded charges. 1 had been released on bond pending the drug trial and was taken back into custody on July 13th. 1, identified in case documents only as the 6th defendant, a logistics coordinator believed to have operated primarily out of Fremont County, was not located at the time of the superseding indictment's unsealing. As of the date of these events, that individual remained at large. The investigation into the network's full scope continued to expand after the rescue. A joint DEA-FBI financial review, initiated following the Ruxton Avenue discovery, identified 3 additional shell companies connected to the same ownership chain as the Manitou Springs property. 2 of those companies had been dissolved in April of 2026, after the primary drug arrests, but before the Ruxton Avenue entry. The 3rd remained active, holding the deed to a storage facility in Teller County, approximately 25 miles northwest of Colorado Springs. That facility was searched under a separate warrant on July 15th. It contained no captives. It contained financial records, prepaid communication devices, and approximately $1.2 million in U.S. currency that had not been accounted for in the primary asset forfeiture. The money connected to the shell company chain that had paid the water bill at Ruxton Avenue for 4 months exceeded, in total documented flow, $2 million. Of that amount, approximately $800,000 remained unrecovered as of the date of the superseding indictment. One detail in the case file stayed with me long after going through these records: the water bill. The one that Marcus Kellner flagged and wrote a footnote about in a financial asset memo that most people on the prosecution team would have skimmed. The bill for the previous month, the month before the rescue, was for $17.40. That is the amount, paid automatically, on time, from a shell account that kept 16 women alive in a heated space and simultaneously left a financial thread that a careful analyst was going to find eventually. $17.40. Paid every month. Because someone in the network valued the operational continuity of the property more than they feared the paper trail. The indictment process moved quickly once the rescue was public. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Colorado filed the superseding charges on July 14, 2026. The 5 defendants in custody were arraigned on the expanded charges on July 17th. Defense motions for bail modification were denied in all 5 cases, with the presiding judge citing risk of flight and the severity of the new charges. The 6th defendant, the one who had not been located, generated a separate federal fugitive warrant, coordinated through the U.S. Marshals Service and circulated to law enforcement in 6 states. The warrant noted that the individual had documented connections to addresses in Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona, and to at least one contact in northern Mexico. As of the filing date, none of those addresses had produced a confirmed location. There is a particular kind of open loop that major federal cases sometimes leave. The network is documented. The evidence is assembled. The prosecution is moving forward. And somewhere, one thread is still loose. One person who knew what the building contained, who was present at decisions about how the Ruxton Avenue operation was run, who understood what had been happening there for 106 days, and who had not yet been found. The 5 defendants in custody faced maximum sentencing exposure that, in the most serious charges, included life imprisonment. The federal kidnapping statute, as applied to the specific facts documented in the superseding indictment, allowed for that range. Federal sentencing guidelines would ultimately produce a number. That number was not yet known at the time of the unsealing. What was known? Each of the 5 in custody had retained private counsel. Initial plea discussions, according to sources familiar with the proceedings, had not produced agreements. The case was likely going to trial. The 16 women were no longer in federal custody. They had been released to family or to medical care after their hospital evaluations concluded. Victim specialists from the FBI and from HSI remained in contact with each. Their names were not part of any public filing. Their locations were not disclosed. Kristen Hale's parents, the ones who had been driving Interstate 50 every weekend, with her photograph taped to the dashboard, had not spoken publicly. A brief statement, provided through a victim advocate to the U.S. Attorney's Office, said only that their daughter was home and that they were grateful to the agents who had found her. Unpopular opinion, perhaps, the word grateful in that context is doing a great deal of work for a system that did not connect 16 disappearances for 106 days and would not have found that building at all if a financial analyst had not read a footnote about a water bill. The agents who executed the Ruxton Avenue operation did their jobs with skill and professionalism. The system that allowed 16 women to go missing across multiple jurisdictions without triggering a consolidated search response did not. Will that change because of this case? Comment yes or no. Because the next time a water bill doesn't get flagged, the answer to that question is what matters. The Pikes Peak fentanyl case was prosecuted as a drug operation. That is what it was. 300,000 pressed pills. 6 defendants. 3 counties. A multi-month task force investigation that produced a solid indictment and a series of arrests. Underneath it, running parallel, invisible in the same buildings and ledgers for 106 days, was something else. Something that the drug case would never have found without a water bill, a footnote, and an analyst who read both. The drywall at Ruxton Avenue has been cut open. The 16 women are in hospitals and then in their homes. The superseding indictment is unsealed. The financial records are in federal custody. One defendant is still not in custody. $800,000 is still unaccounted for. And the Teller County facility, the one that turned up in the shell company search 2 weeks after the rescue, points at a network that extends further than the 6 original defendants accounted for. How much further? The financial review was ongoing as of mid-July. The Marshals Service fugitive hunt was active. The network, as documented, connected to contacts outside the United States. The building on Ruxton Avenue is sealed under federal evidence order. The water service has been disconnected. The utility account that paid $17.40 a month for 4 months. The account that kept the building running and simultaneously left the thread that Reyes and Kellner followed to the end, was closed by federal order on July 12, 2026, the day after the rescue. The demand that created the need for that building still exists. The infrastructure that served it extended further than the 6 names on the original indictment. One of those names is still somewhere in 6 states, or across a border, with knowledge of every operational detail about what happened in that sealed bay for 106 days. The case is not over. The rescue happened. Both of those things are true at the